This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us. You're tuned into When Science Speaks, and I'm your host, Mark Bayer. It's great to have you along with us for this episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Bayer Strategic Consulting, which is a unique training and advocacy firm in Washington, D.C. that helps scientists and engineers get funding, advance their careers, and build key relationships with their most important stakeholders. To get bonus content and useful resources, you can become a friend of the show just by texting Science Speak to 44222. It is so great to have Dr. Jennifer Kahnweiler on the show today. Jennifer is a best-selling author, a keynote speaker, and executive coach. Her newest book, which is called Creating Introvert-Friendly Workplaces, has been hailed by LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman as, quote, a valuable resource for any company that wants to increase its access to talent and broaden the range of viewpoints it brings to key issues and challenges. Jennifer also is the author of Quiet Influence, The Genius of Opposites, and The Introverted Leader. And we'll have all those links to her books in the show notes accompanying this episode. Known as the champion of introverts, Jennifer has been featured in Forbes, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, and other places of note. She's based in Atlanta, Georgia. She received her PhD in counseling and organizational development from Florida State and degrees in sociology and counseling from Washington University in St. Louis. Welcome to the show, Jennifer. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Hey, Mark, it's great to be on again. It's a thrill.
I know, encore presentation, because you actually were on the show way back in January of 2019, and that was after the second edition of your book, Introverted Leader, came out. So thanks for coming back.
Oh, I love listening to your show.
Thank you. And you know, during that interview, I sort of started kind of level set things by referencing comedian Jeff Foxworthy, who built, as you know, this whole comedic empire around his "you might be a redneck if" jokes. And I think you mentioned before that he's down in Atlanta, or at least in Georgia, not too far from where you're at. And I just thought that it would be helpful for listeners who might kind of be wondering like where they sort of fit on in that category, extrovert, introvert, or maybe a combination. If you could just start by explaining to folks, you know, some of the main qualities of introverts, sort of like you might be an introvert if.
You know, and I love that question, Mark, because I was thinking of a new T-shirt that we can put together.
That's right.
On there.
That would be great.
An introvert if. So here are some answers possibly to that is if you relish quiet time, if you think deeply, if you prepare, humble, if you're a good listener, if you're an observer, the T-shirt would probably have two sides to it, wouldn't it? So if you relish deep focus, one-on-one conversations rather than, large group gatherings sort of thing. So, and the bottom line really is around, if we sum that all up, it's also, around where you get your energy. And as an introvert, you typically get your energy from within. And you like to be stimulated, you like people, but it's just in the kind of doses that you like it in. It's not, you don't want to be around people all the time. You need those spaces for quiet time.
So important. And thanks for detailing that, Jennifer. And we're going to get to some of those points that you mentioned. In your latest book, which is fantastic, by the way, it's Creating Introvert-Friendly Workplaces. You're writing about remote work and its benefits for introverts. And, you point out that the rise in remote work over the past decade has really skyrocketed. Of course, none of us could have predicted the Zoom explosion triggered by the pandemic. It's really interesting. Your timing of your book was perfect. And I wonder if you can talk about the benefits and some of the risks that you also address for introverts when it comes to remote work.
Well, Mark, there were so many memes coming out in the beginning, weren't there? Like, oh my gosh, this is now the introverts nirvana.
Mhm.
And I checked in with some of my introverted clients and colleagues. And, it wasn't totally nirvana. I think there's gray to everything. So, on the plus side of remote work, and this was pre-pandemic, and it's been certainly amplified in many ways over the last year. And we just did a survey on this too, which I'm happy to share with folks. There's a lot less stress. People found that the commuting was, really taking its toll, particularly in those metropolitan areas like where you and I live. And having that time, that extra time to be with family, to have more control over your schedule, in some cases, not all, made a big difference. Having that chance to take spaces, as I mentioned, throughout the day. And so we came in the survey that we did recently of 200 introverts and asking them specifically about remote work. 90% of them, Mark, said that they want to keep that situation going. At the same time, there are also, as I mentioned, it's gray, so that there are challenges too. And interestingly enough, the challenges that we found also mirror the recent work that Microsoft did on a much larger study even of introverts and extroverts, of all kinds of people. And that was the disconnection that people said they felt. And what we found is that, and this is true, again, pre-pandemic, but even more so during, which was, being not feeling like you really had those sort of extemporaneous interactions with your team, being able to build relationships, which we know that's how work gets done in organizations, but it's also how our connections with people happen. It has to be sort of now with, the virtual world for a lot of us, very intentional, when we connect with people. So I think there was that frustration that people are expressing about not having that real live conversation that can just emerge organically.
Right, for sure. And you mentioned in your book, and I found this fascinating, you talked about creative paralysis. Yes, you've already mentioned this during our chat, is introverts do need a certain amount of alone time, but too much can lead to isolation and lack of motivation and some other factors that I'm sure you found out as you completed your study.
Yeah, and I mean, this has been a theme. It came up really originally when I was looking at how introverts influence, Mark. And one of the key themes there was that, they took the time to be in their heads because that's a natural place for introverts to live, to really, and a lot of certainly the clients that and listeners that you have, there's a lot of great deep thinking that goes on, but too much of anything can lead to, can be a problem.
Right,
we always say overuse of a strength is, use of a strength and too much excess becomes a problem. So that's exactly what you're saying. And I mean, anybody who has tried to create or write a book or do anything that takes any kind of creative power, which a lot of our projects do, if we're forcing it and we're continuing to have those thoughts sort of swirl around in our heads and not bouncing them off, colleagues, not sort of taking breaks from that intensity, where we just sort of maybe go on a walk and then we have the burst of
so true.
Right? What'd you say? Yeah.
So true.
True, right? So people have said it's kind of like the shower thoughts that come, when you get away from it. So creative paralysis really is a term that that came up during that work when people were trying to influence and they got stuck. And I see this happening now, certainly with, in addition to that, I think isolation and loneliness. Again, too much of being by ourselves. And I've had extroverts say this quite a bit, but introverts too. Like I miss people. The word loneliness has come up a lot lately. Right.
Thank you for talking more about that. And I want to also touch upon here something that you've referenced. And, I'm an evangelist for this hardwired human need for connection. I'm an extrovert, and that's one of the qualities that you and I share, I know.
Right.
And I talk about the need to connect before you communicate. And, you just talked about here a little bit about finding that right balance, if you're an introvert, between downtime and connection. And I thought it was really interesting in your latest book how you discussed co-working spaces, and maybe co-working spaces could be a way to strike that balance, of course, when it's safe to do that. And I would love for you to
Yeah.
share more information about that.
Well, it's funny, you caught me off the day after I watched the documentary that just came out about WeWork,
Oh, okay.
which I highly recommend as
Uh-huh.
an example of going too far with communal workspaces,
Mhm.
where it went prior to the changes in it now. But what happened? Co-working emerged a number of years ago, actually, but it turned out to be a very good option for those people who actually are working in their own home offices, but still feel the need to have that energy, you know what I mean, of people around you. Right. So there's something, I don't want to say magical, but maybe that is the word, that gets you more focused when you are around other people working. And I think I point to the Starbucks or coffee shops where you see, you know, that whole phenomenon, and hopefully we can go back to that in a safe way, you know, where there's this buzz of activity. Well, in the co-working spaces, and I've myself experienced it for the last several years. In fact, I wrote my last book there. Introverts, extroverts. If you wanted to strike up a conversation with somebody, you could. You know, I found new resources when I was there, learned about yoga studios, you know, just kind of making very low-key chit-chat is a way for people, as you say, to connect. And if you choose to build a relationship, yes, but maybe not. So I think that idea of just being together is something that we've all realized we really miss. And so hopefully we can find a balance, you know, with the term now hybrid being used a lot. You know, we work some at home, but we also have times now we're talking about going back into some type of office space where we can be together in actual face-to-face and have that, it's sort of je ne sais quoi, I don't even know the word for it, but it's a different feeling when you are actually talking with people face-to-face.
Yeah. And I think, you know, just from my own kind of experiences, that perhaps that goes back, that feeling that you're talking about, that sense, that positive feeling, kind of maybe that goes back to kind of when we were out there, you know, on the savannah, and we needed to stick together in tribes, or we were going to be toast for whatever wild beast happened to be roaming around. Maybe that's our primitive brain talking at this point. You know, I want to shift for a minute, if I could, to kind of look at this from the employer perspective. And you've been a longtime leader in the introvert revolution, as you've called that. I love that. Maybe it's an introvert quiet revolution.
Yeah.
And it's great. And, you know, I'm wondering how the attitudes of employers now have changed over time with respect to introverts, you know, during this period, you know, thinking back when you were perhaps just beginning to focus in this area.
Well, there's definitely been changes and in the positive direction, Mark, but I say that qualified. If you think about it, I started researching this probably about 14 years ago. My first book came out in 2009. The Introverted Leader, the first edition. And when I would tell people what I was writing about, they say, isn't that an oxymoron? How could you be an introvert and be a leader? And I still get that quite often. I mean, I have numerous examples in the new book, Creating Introvert-Friendly Workplaces, of tremendous introvert bias in corporate America and in other large organizations or of all kinds. People just don't know. It's unconscious, I guess you'd call it, unconscious bias. That, you know, there's nothing wrong with being introverted. They mix it up with being shy. They don't think that you really can progress in your career if you're introverted, which is absolutely, you know, could be nothing further from the truth. But, you know, and I'm sort of painting that picture of, you know, sort of, again, a multifaceted view of what's happening. Like on the positive side, I am really just thrilled to have been hosting a number of, over the last year, since the book came out and since there's more conversation about introversion over the last few years, many of these fireside chats with leaders of very prominent organizations who we've done a little coaxing with, you know, to say your story needs to be told. Because when I was doing the research on this book, I found that when I could find pockets of introvert inclusion, those pockets included a leader who was an executive sponsor, let's say, of an employee resource group, or spoke out about their introversion and wrote about it, on social media. Those examples were pretty few and far between. But now, with a little, as I say, a little coaxing, we are having people at all senior levels of organizations come and join me in conversation about what their journey has been like, how they navigate, being an introvert, moving up the corporate ladder without doing it in the type A way. And so it's been very gratifying. And I think that's going to, among other changes that I see happening, is going to make one of the biggest differences in really creating more of a momentum to this movement.
In the beginning, when we were just chatting at the first, right in the beginning of the interview, you were talking about the different qualities that introverts possess. And so many of them I associate with strong leaders,
Yes.
Good listening, being thoughtful, these types of things, and really like having a strong emotional intelligence quotient, whatever you want to talk about, that really being an asset. And I want to pick up with something that you said too, Jennifer, about, sort of maybe subconscious bias. And, if I'm an introvert, I'm wondering if that is a quality that I should mention in some way during a job interview with a potential employer.
That question has really never come up before, but it's a good question, Mark. It really is. And it's more, to me, I think at this point, I wouldn't perhaps use the term introvert just because there is misunderstanding about it. And I want you to have every chance you have, to have an opportunity to shine in an organization. One could make an argument against that too and say, well, if people don't really understand introverts, you don't really want to work there. But I would take the more cautious view. What I would do is really be clear about what you need as a person to be successful. And that's what you're looking for, right, when you're interviewing. Like, it's just as much you figuring out, do I want to work there, as they're basically, quote, buying you as talent, Right. So you would want to, as an introverted hire or prospective hire, you want to be looking for the types of environment and an introvert-friendly workplace, which is going to really nurture who you are. And there would be particular things I would suggest you look at in the book that would tell you whether or not, this is going to be a good fit for you or not. So I wouldn't necessarily say I'm an introvert, but you're going to have your lens and your eyes and ears open.
I just think that is such a great point, Jennifer. And thanks for giving that real piece of practical advice. It's very much consistent. It's almost like you're describing the qualities of what you need, like you said, without using a term that people misuse all the time and have an unconscious bias against. Yeah. So no need to actually say the word, but maybe, just describing what you need, which is something that everybody should be doing in a job interview at some point anyway, to make sure the fit is there. So thank you for that real practical guidance. As an extrovert, that I am, I'm wondering, should I strive to also tap into characteristics of introverts? And we've talked about how important, how beneficial those things are, to be kind of a ambivert, as you mentioned in your book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the good news is too, Mark, we all have both sets of characteristics within us, right? So just as introverts are constantly having to flex, to adjust to an extroverted world, to develop their strengths in, speaking up in meetings and public speaking, whereas that might be, just sort of easier for us. Absolutely, we need to tap into the other side. And I think that extroverts are starting to say, I am. And I will tell you, the pandemic has helped accelerate that. We've heard from so many extroverts who've said, you know what, I was addicted to busyness, and now that I can't go out and can't do all these things, I'm starting to tap into, parts of myself that I didn't even know were there, and what I used to enjoy doing as a child, or painting or writing, or, all the kinds of things that you might have pushed away because they were too quiet, focused, too solitary. So I think absolutely we all need to be quiet. And believe me, I'll say it kind of in jest, but the introverts will be very happy if we start to listen, Mark.
I think that's just great. I love that point, Jennifer. Really interesting and so vivid, such a great example of that. I think we're all better off if we take a breath and exhale every once in a while and sort of get in touch with our inner introvert. I know I'm going to do more of an effort to in that regard myself. As we wrap up, I want to ask you, as a leading expert in this area, looking at the horizon towards post-pandemic workplaces and interactions generally with other people, how do you see the environment for introverts in terms of prevalence of, say, introvert-friendly policies, or maybe more commonly accepted communication channels? What do you see as you look into your crystal ball?
Yeah, and I love your question there about more commonly accepted communication channels. Yeah, that is a really good point as far as more options available to connect with each other. I do, Mark, I'm very hopeful. I think the more that we understand about introversion, the fact that now diversity, inclusion, and equity departments are looking at introversion as a part of the circle, as part of widening the circle to include many aspects like temperament, like neurodiversity. I really am very hopeful about companies adjusting to the culture or changing their cultures. But it's important that we all act as champions and, be voices for quiet people that are quiet, and intentionally, put our lens on our different practices. The 7 practices I have in the book, Creating Introvert-Friendly Workplaces, actually outlines specific things you can do to become a change agent in your organization to really amplify and unleash the talent of everybody. So I think, yes, a long way of extroverted way of saying, yes, I'm very hopeful.
Wonderful.
I'm very hopeful.
Just wonderful. We're so fortunate to have your insights, Jennifer. These really are just great pieces of information for all of us, wherever you are, introvert, extrovert, ambivert, whatever it happens to be more conscious of these things. And like you said, unleashing the potential of folks that we work with by better understanding, how they work and what they need.
Well, thank you, Mark. And you are one of those champions. So I appreciate you staying with this and really promoting this topic. It's very important that people like you who have a megaphone share these ideas. So thank you so much.
Great. Listeners, thank you for being along for this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.